The text message that destroyed my marriage arrived at 3:47 p.m. on February 13th. Hey babe, bringing a friend from work to dinner tomorrow. You'll love him. I stared at my phone, sitting in my cramped IT cubicle at Morrison Tech Solutions, watching the fluorescent lights flicker overhead. Melissa had never brought anyone to our Valentine's tradition before. In 8 years of marriage, our romantic dinner at Romano's steakhouse was sacred territory. My name is Brian Dorsey, and I fix computers for a living. Nothing glamorous about it, but it pays the bills and keeps our modest suburban house in Millfield running. At 38, I've learned that life rarely surprises you in good ways. Everything okay, Brian? Pete Martinez called from the next cubicle. Pete worked construction during the day and took night classes in computer repair. He was the kind of guy who'd give you his last $20 and help you move furniture on a Sunday. Melissa's bringing someone to our Valentine's dinner, I said, still staring at the message. Pete wheeled his chair over, his weathered face creasing into a frown. That's weird, man. Who brings a third wheel to Valentine's dinner? Someone from work, apparently. I scrolled through her recent messages, looking for clues. Lots of mentions of late nights at the office, weekend projects, and someone named Greg who seemed to feature prominently in her stories lately. Melissa worked as a project manager at Syntech Industries, a mid-sized software company downtown. She made decent money, certainly more than me, and never let me forget it during our increasingly frequent arguments. Maybe it's innocent, Pete offered, but his tone suggested he didn't believe it. I drove home through the February slush, my 10-year-old Honda Civic struggling with the hills. Our neighborhood was the kind where everyone knew everyone else's business, especially Mrs. Klein next door, who treated her front window like a surveillance station. The house felt different when I walked in. Melissa was in the bedroom, trying on dresses and tossing rejects onto our unmade bed. She'd never put this much effort into just the two of us anymore. Which one says, professional but approachable? She asked, holding up a black cocktail dress I'd bought her for our anniversary. She'd never worn it. Depends on who you're trying to approach, I said. She shot me a look. Don't start, Brian. Greg is my regional director. This dinner could be huge for my career. Greg. I let the name hang in the air. The same Greg who's been keeping you at the office until 9 p.m. 3 nights a week. He's dedicated. We all are. Some of us actually care about advancing instead of just fixing other people's computer problems. There it was. The contempt she'd been barely hiding for months, now right out in the open. I watched her slip into the black dress, the one she'd claimed was too fancy for our anniversary. What does Greg's wife think about him working such long hours with his attractive project manager? Melissa froze, her back to me. He's divorced. Recently. It's been hard on him. Of course he was. Recently divorced, vulnerable, probably telling her how different she was from his ex-wife. I'd seen this movie before, just never starring my own wife. That night, I lay awake listening to Melissa text someone. The soft glow of her phone screen lit up her face every few minutes, and she'd smile at whatever she was reading. She hadn't smiled at me like that in months. The next morning, Valentine's Day, she was up early, showering and doing her hair with the kind of care she used to reserve for job interviews or our wedding day. I made coffee and watched her transform herself into someone I barely recognized. What time are we meeting Greg? I asked. 7:30. And Brian? She turned to face me, and for a moment I saw something that might have been guilt flicker across her face. Just be yourself, okay? Don't try too hard. Don't try too hard. At my own Valentine's dinner. I spent the day at work running diagnostics and trying to focus on anything except the growing knot in my stomach. Pete kept shooting me concerned looks, and around lunch he finally spoke up. You sure about tonight, man? Something feels off about this whole thing. I need to see it for myself, I said. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it really is just work. But I wasn't wrong, and we both knew it. Romano's steakhouse was our place. We'd had our first date there, celebrated every anniversary, and shared countless quiet dinners over red wine and candlelight. The hostess, Maria, knew us by name and always saved us table 12 by the window. I arrived first, wearing my best shirt and the tie Melissa had bought me for Christmas. Maria seated me at our usual table, and I ordered a scotch while I waited. The restaurant was packed with couples celebrating Valentine's Day, all of them looking happier than I felt. At 7:40, Melissa walked in. She looked stunning in the black dress, her blonde hair swept up, wearing jewelry I didn't recognize. But she wasn't alone. Greg Faulkner was everything I wasn't. Tall, confident, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. He had silver hair and the kind of smile that suggested he was used to getting what he wanted. He placed his hand on the small of Melissa's back as Maria led them to our table, and she leaned into his touch like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Brian!" Melissa's voice was artificially bright. "This is Greg. Greg, my husband Brian." Greg extended his hand with a politician's smile. "Brian, I've heard so much about you. Melissa tells me you're in IT." His handshake was firm, aggressive. A power play. "Computer repair mostly, small stuff." "Well, someone has to keep the machines running, right?" The condescension was subtle but unmistakable. We sat down, and immediately I became the third wheel at my own Valentine's dinner. Greg and Melissa fell into easy conversation about work projects, office politics, and people I'd never heard of. They shared inside jokes and finished each other's sentences. When Greg ordered wine, he didn't ask what I preferred. "The Bordeaux is excellent here," he told the waiter. "We'll take a bottle." "Actually, I prefer—" I started. "Trust me on this one," Greg interrupted with a wink at Melissa. "I know wine." The evening deteriorated from there. They talked about their recent business trip to Chicago, laughing about some mishap with hotel reservations. Melissa touched his arm when she laughed, and he looked at her like she was the only person in the room. Under the table, I watched her foot slide against his calf. His hand disappeared below the tablecloth, and she bit her lip in a way that made my stomach turn. "So, Brian," Greg said during a brief lull, "Melissa tells me you two have been married 8 years. That's quite an accomplishment these days." "Some accomplishment," I said, taking a large sip of wine I didn't want. "Marriage takes work," Greg continued, cutting his steak with surgical precision. "Communication, shared goals, growing together instead of apart. Isn't that right, Mel?" Mel. He called her Mel. I was the only one who'd ever called her that. "Greg's very wise about relationships," Melissa said, her eyes fixed on his face. "He's helped me understand a lot about what I really want." The words hit like a physical blow. Around us, other couples held hands and gazed into each other's eyes. At the next table, a man was proposing, the woman crying happy tears as she said yes. And here I sat, watching my wife fall in love with someone else in real time. "If you'll excuse me," I said, standing up. "I need some air." In the bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face and stared at myself in the mirror. 40 minutes in, and my marriage was officially over. The question was what to do about it. When I returned to the table, they were leaning close together, studying something on Greg's phone. They sprang apart when they saw me, but the damage was done. "Everything okay?" Melissa asked, not quite meeting my eyes. "Perfect," I said. "Just perfect." The rest of dinner passed in a blur of forced conversation and barely concealed intimacy between my wife and her boss. When the check came, Greg insisted on paying. "My treat," he said. "Consider it a Valentine's gift to both of you." Both of us, as if we were some charity case he was helping out. In the parking lot, Greg pulled Melissa aside for a private conversation while I waited by our car. They stood close together under the streetlight, and I watched him touch her face gently before kissing her cheek. It lasted just long enough to make his intentions clear. The drive home was silent. Melissa stared out the passenger window, and I focused on the road, my hands gripping the steering wheel tight enough to leave marks. "He seems nice," I finally said as we pulled into our driveway. "He is. He's been a good friend during a difficult time." Friend. Right. Inside, she went straight to the bedroom and closed the door. I heard the shower running, then the soft murmur of her voice as she made a phone call. Probably to Greg, rehashing the evening and planning their next move. I sat in my recliner in the living room, staring at our wedding photo on the mantel. We looked so young, so happy, so certain that love would be enough to carry us through anything life threw at us. My phone buzzed with a text from Pete. "How'd it go?" I typed back, "About as well as you'd expect." "Want to talk about it?" "Tomorrow. Tonight I need to think." I thought about a lot of things that night. About the woman I'd married and the stranger she'd become. About Greg and his expensive suit and casual cruelty. About the way Melissa had looked at him like he'd hung the moon. But mostly, I thought about what comes next, when your wife brings her lover to your Valentine's dinner and doesn't even have the decency to hide it. I woke up alone. Melissa had already left for work, her side of the bed cold and perfectly made. No note, no explanation, no acknowledgement of what had happened the night before. Just the lingering scent of her perfume and the sound of silence filling our house. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Pete and a text. "Coffee? You sound like you need it." We met at Murphy's Diner, a greasy spoon near the construction site where Pete worked. He took one look at my face and ordered us both the full breakfast without asking what I wanted. "That bad, huh?" he said, sliding into the cracked vinyl booth across from me. I told him everything, the hand-holding, the inside jokes, the way Greg had taken over our table like he owned it. Pete listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. "So, what's your plan?" he asked when I finished. "I don't have one yet. Part of me keeps thinking maybe I'm overreacting, maybe it's not what it looks like." Pete snorted. "Brother, I've been divorced twice. I know what cheating looks like, and what you described ain't a business dinner. She's still my wife." "Is she? Because from where I'm sitting, sounds like she's already moved on." The truth of it hit harder than I expected. Melissa hadn't just betrayed me, she'd replaced me. In her mind, our marriage was probably already over. "You need evidence," Pete continued. "Something concrete. Then you need a lawyer." I spent the rest of the day going through the motions at work, fixing computers and pretending my world wasn't falling apart. Around 3 p.m., I remembered something that made my stomach drop. Our shared cloud storage account. Melissa and I had set it up years ago to share photos and documents between our devices. She'd probably forgotten I had access to her backup files. I waited until my supervisor stepped out, then logged into the account. What I found there made me wish I'd never looked. Photos from the Chicago business trip. Melissa and Greg at dinner, his arm around her shoulders. Melissa in a hotel bathrobe, smiling at the camera with bedroom eyes. Greg shirtless by a hotel room window, the city lights twinkling behind him. But the worst part was the text message screenshots she'd saved. Messages between her and her friend Chloe, discussing the affair in explicit detail. "He's amazing, Chloe. I haven't felt this alive in years." "What about Brian? What about him? We've been roommates for months. Greg makes me feel like a woman again." "Are you going to leave Brian?" "Eventually. Greg says we need to be careful about the timing because of work. But yes, I think so." I printed everything and stuffed it into a manila envelope. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely operate the printer. That evening, I waited for Melissa to come home. She walked in at 9:30, claiming she'd been in meetings all day. Her hair was mussed, her lipstick was gone, and she had that glow that comes from being thoroughly satisfied by someone who wasn't her husband. "How was work?" I asked from the kitchen table, where I'd been sitting with the envelope in front of me. "Busy, really busy. Greg's got us working on this huge presentation for the board next week." She barely looked at me as she rifled through the mail. I might have to work late again tomorrow. More meetings with Greg? Something in my tone made her pause. Among others, yes. Why? I slid the envelope across the table. Because I think we need to talk about your relationship with your boss. She opened the envelope and went white. The photos fluttered onto the table like evidence in a crime scene, which I suppose they were. Brian, I can explain. Which part? The part where you're screwing your boss, or the part where you brought him to our Valentine's dinner to humiliate me in public? It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. I stood up, surprised by how calm I sounded. The question is what we do about it. She gathered the photos with trembling hands. Are you going to tell people about this? People? You mean like Greg's ex-wife? Or your HR department? Or maybe our friends and neighbors who saw you two playing footsie at Romano's last night? Please, Brian. I know how this looks, but it's complicated. No, Melissa, it's actually pretty simple. You decided you wanted someone else, and instead of having the guts to end our marriage first, you chose to cheat. And then you made me watch. Tears started flowing down her cheeks, but they felt calculated somehow. Melissa had always been good at crying when she needed sympathy. I never meant for it to happen. Greg was going through his divorce, and I was just trying to be supportive. Things got out of hand. How long? What? How long have you been sleeping with him? She looked away. 3 months. 3 months. While I'd been working extra hours to save money for the vacation she'd been planning her exit strategy with another man. I want you out, I said quietly. Brian, please. We can work through this. I'll end things with Greg. We can go to counseling. You brought him to our Valentine's dinner, Melissa. You sat across from me and flirted with your lover while I watched. There's no coming back from that. Where am I supposed to go? I hear Greg's recently divorced. Maybe he has room. She flinched, like I'd slapped her. You're being cruel. I'm being honest. There's a difference. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to downtown Millfield to see a lawyer. Janet Morrison was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who specialized in divorce cases. Her office walls were covered with certificates and photos of her with various judges and politicians. Adultery cases are tricky in this state, she explained after reviewing my evidence. We have no-fault divorce laws, so her affair won't affect the property division much. But it might help with alimony, especially if we can prove she was using marital assets to support the relationship. What do you mean? Hotel rooms, dinners, gifts. If she was spending your money on her boyfriend, that's considered dissipation of marital assets. I thought about the expensive jewelry she'd been wearing, the new clothes, the sudden interest in fine dining. How do I prove that? Credit card statements? Bank records? Do you have access to your joint accounts? Yes. Get me everything from the last 6 months. And Brian? She leaned forward, her expression serious. Don't do anything stupid. Don't confront the boyfriend. Don't make scenes in public. Let the law handle this. I nodded, but I was already thinking about Greg's smug face and the way he'd touched my wife in front of me. Some things couldn't be handled by lawyers. That afternoon, I went through our financial records with the dedication of a forensic accountant. What I found made me sick. Melissa had been systematically draining our savings to fund her affair. Expensive dinners charged to our joint credit card. Hotel rooms in Chicago, New York, and Boston. A $1,000 necklace from Tiffany's that I'd never seen her wear. She'd stolen from me to pay for her betrayal. When she came home that night, I was waiting with the bank statement spread across the kitchen table like a paper trail of deception. $15,000, I said without looking up. That's what you've spent on your boyfriend in 3 months. She set down her purse carefully. I can explain that too. I'm sure you can. You're very creative when you need to be. Some of those charges were legitimate business expenses. The lingerie from Victoria's Secret was a business expense? She had no answer for that. I filed for divorce today, I continued. You'll be served with papers tomorrow at work. I thought you should know. Brian, please. I know I made mistakes, but… Mistakes? I finally looked at her, and she took a step back from whatever she saw in my face. You didn't make mistakes, Melissa. You made choices. You chose to cheat. You chose to lie. You chose to steal from our marriage to fund your affair. And you chose to humiliate me in front of half the town. It doesn't have to end like this. It already has ended. This is just the paperwork. She left that night, taking 2 suitcases and promising to come back for the rest of her things. I watched from the window as Greg's BMW pulled up to the curb. He didn't get out to help her with her bags, just popped the trunk from inside the car like she was an Uber passenger. Mrs. Klein was watching from her window too. By morning, the whole neighborhood would know that the Dorseys were getting divorced, and why. I should have felt relieved, but instead, I felt empty. 8 years of marriage reduced to a pile of legal documents and a house that echoed with memories of better times. Pete came over that weekend with beer and take-out Chinese food. We sat in my living room, eating lo mein and watching college basketball. "How you holding up?" he asked during a commercial break. "I'm angry," I admitted. "Not just hurt. Angry. She didn't just cheat on me, Pete. She made me watch. She brought him to our place on our day and made me sit there while they played house. Anger's good. Anger means you're not giving up." "What's that supposed to mean?" Pete grinned, and there was something dangerous in his expression. "It means maybe it's time Greg learned what happens when you mess with someone's family." The divorce papers hit Melissa's office like a bomb on Monday morning. I knew because Chloe Patterson, Melissa's former best friend, called me at work to give me the play-by-play. "Brian, I am so sorry," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of fake sympathy that comes from being the bearer of juicy gossip. "I had no idea how bad things had gotten between you two." That was a lie. Chloe had known about the affair from the beginning. Her text messages with Melissa proved it. But now that the marriage was officially over, she was hedging her bets, trying to stay friendly with both sides. "What exactly are you sorry about, Chloe?" "Well, you know, the whole situation with Greg. I tried to tell Melissa she was making a mistake, but she wouldn't listen." Another lie. According to the screenshots, Chloe had been encouraging the affair, living vicariously through Melissa's exciting new romance. "I'm sure you did your best," I said dryly. "The thing is, Brian, people are starting to talk. About Melissa and Greg, I mean. It's becoming a real problem at work." Now we were getting to the real reason for her call. Chloe worked in marketing at a company that did business with Syntech. She was worried about her own reputation getting tangled up in the scandal. What kind of problem? Well, HR is asking questions, and Greg's ex-wife found out somehow. She showed up at the office Friday afternoon and caused quite a scene. This was news to me. What kind of scene? She confronted Melissa in the lobby right in front of everyone, called her a homewrecker, said she was going to ruin both their careers. Security had to escort her out. I felt a grim satisfaction. Sandra Faulkner, Greg's ex-wife, was a lawyer with connections throughout the city's business community. If she wanted to make life difficult for Greg and Melissa, she had the resources to do it. That must have been embarrassing for them. Oh, it gets worse. Apparently Sandra's been calling their clients, letting them know about the affair. 3 companies have already pulled their contracts. Better and better. And how is Greg handling all this? Not well. He's been in meetings with the executive team all week. Word is they're considering putting him on administrative leave while they investigate whether he violated the company's ethics policies. After I hung up, I sat back in my chair and smiled for the first time in weeks. I hadn't needed to lift a finger. Greg and Melissa's affair was imploding all on its own, taking their careers down with it. But my satisfaction was short-lived. That afternoon, Pete called with disturbing news. "You need to know something," he said without preamble. I was having a beer at Murphy's last night, and I overheard some guys talking about you. What guys? Jim Kowalski and Dave Chen. They were saying some pretty nasty stuff. Jim and Dave had been friends of mine for years. We played poker together twice a month and had season tickets to the local minor league baseball team. If they were talking about me, it wasn't good. What kind of stuff? They're taking Melissa's side, saying you must have been a lousy husband if she had to look elsewhere for affection. Jim said Greg's a good guy who got caught up in a bad situation. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Jim said that? There's more. Apparently Melissa's been telling people that you were emotionally abusive, that she was afraid to leave you because of your temper. My temper? I've never laid a hand on her. I've never even raised my voice. I know that, and you know that. But she's got people believing her version of events. Dave said you probably drove her into Greg's arms. This was a new level of betrayal. It wasn't enough for Melissa to cheat and leave. Now she was destroying my reputation to justify her actions. There's something else, Pete continued. They're planning to confront you at poker night Thursday. Jim wants to tell you what a piece of shit you are for refusing to take responsibility for your failed marriage. Thursday night poker was held at Dave's house, a tradition going back 5 years. The core group included me, Pete, Jim, Dave, and 2 other guys from the neighborhood, Mike Torres and Steve Walsh. We'd been through divorces, job losses, and family crises together. I'd considered them some of my closest friends. Are you going? I asked Pete. Damn right I'm going. Someone needs to have your back. No, I said, an idea forming in my mind. I'll handle this myself. Thursday night arrived cold and gray, with snow threatening in the dark clouds overhead. I drove to Dave's house in my Honda, parking behind Jim's pickup truck. Through the front window, I could see the guys already gathered around the dining room table, cards and beer bottles scattered across the green felt surface. I let myself in through the front door, as I had dozens of times before. The conversation stopped when I walked into the dining room. Brian, Dave said, not quite meeting my eyes. We weren't sure you'd show up. Wouldn't miss it, I said, taking my usual seat. Deal me in. The atmosphere was tense. Jim kept shooting glances at Dave, who was shuffling the cards with unnecessary concentration. Mike and Steve looked uncomfortable, like they'd rather be anywhere else. We played 3 hands in relative silence before Jim finally spoke up. So, Brian, how are you handling everything? Everything meaning what, exactly? The divorce, the whole situation with Melissa. I picked up my cards and arranged them carefully. I'm handling it fine. Thanks for asking. Must be tough, having your marriage fall apart like that. It is tough, I agreed. Especially when your wife cheats on you with her boss and then lies about it to make herself look like the victim. Dave cleared his throat. Look, Brian, we've all heard Melissa's side of things. Maybe there's more to the story than you're admitting. What exactly has Melissa told you? That you 2 grew apart, that you stopped communicating, stopped trying to make the marriage work. She said you became cold and distant. I set down my cards. Did she also tell you that she's been screwing Greg Faulkner for 3 months, that she spent $15,000 of our joint savings on hotel rooms and gifts for her boyfriend, that she brought him to our Valentine's dinner and made me sit there while they played footsie under the table? She said you're exaggerating, Jim said, that you're trying to make her look bad because you can't accept your part in the marriage failing. My part. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out copies of the photos and text messages. Here's my part. I spread them across the table like a poker hand. The guys leaned forward to look, and I watched their expressions change as they realized what they were seeing. Jesus, Mike whispered, staring at a photo of Melissa and Greg kissing in what was clearly a hotel room. She's been planning to leave me for months, I continued, pulling out the printed text messages. Here's a conversation with Chloe where she talks about how excited she is to start her new life with Greg, and here's one where she laughs about how clueless I was. Dave picked up one of the messages and read it aloud. Brian's so pathetic. He actually thinks I'm working late. Last night, Greg and I went to that new French place downtown, and I told Brian I was in a budget meeting. The silence that followed was deafening. I didn't know, Jim said quietly. She made it sound like you two just grew apart naturally. She lied to you, I said, just like she lied to me for 3 months, and you believed her without even asking for my side of the story. Steve was studying a photo of Greg and Melissa at a restaurant, his face grim. This is from Romano's, isn't it? That's your Valentine's dinner. She brought her boyfriend to our anniversary spot and made me watch them together. Then she went home with him and left me to drive home alone. Brian, we're sorry, Dave said. We should have talked to you first before jumping to conclusions. You should have, I agreed. But you didn't. Instead, you decided I must be the bad guy because it was easier than believing your friend's wife could be that cruel. What can we do to make this right? Mike asked. I gathered up the photos and put them back in my pocket. Nothing. The damage is done. Come on, man. We made a mistake. Let us make it up to you. You want to make it up to me? I stood up, leaving my cards face down on the table. Stop taking her calls. Stop listening to her lies, and maybe think twice before you judge someone without knowing all the facts. I walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. Oh, and one more thing. Melissa's been telling people I was abusive, that I have a temper problem. You guys have known me for 5 years. Have you ever seen me lose my temper? Have you ever seen me treat anyone badly? They all shook their heads. Then maybe ask yourselves why she'd lie about that too. I left them sitting around the table in stunned silence. In the driveway, I sat in my car for a moment, hands shaking with adrenaline. I'd lost my wife, and now I'd lost my friends too. But at least they knew the truth now. My phone buzzed with a text from Pete. How'd it go? About as well as expected, I typed back. But they know what really happened now. Good. Want to grab a drink? Rain check. I've got some planning to do. Because the confrontation with my former friends had crystallized something for me. Melissa wasn't content with just ending our marriage. She was actively trying to destroy my reputation, turn our mutual friends against me, and rewrite history to make herself the victim. That was a mistake, because while I might be just a computer repair guy from the suburbs, I was also someone who understood that information was power. And I had information that could destroy both her and Greg's lives just as thoroughly as they'd destroyed mine. It was time to stop playing defense and start playing offense. The war was about to begin. The first shot was fired on a Tuesday morning at 9:15 a.m. I know the exact time because I was sitting in my car outside Syntec Industries, watching the employees arrive for work through the lobby's glass doors. Greg pulled into the parking lot in his silver BMW, the same car he'd used to pick up my wife the night she moved out. He looked tired, stressed, dark circles under his eyes, tie slightly crooked, probably dealing with the fallout from his ex-wife's campaign against him. But he was still coming to work, still playing the part of the successful executive. That composure was about to crack. I waited until he disappeared through the revolving doors, then crossed the street to Brew and Bean, the coffee shop with floor-to-ceiling windows facing Syntec's main entrance. I ordered a large black coffee and a blueberry muffin, paid cash, and claimed the corner window seat. From here, I had a perfect view: lobby reception, elevators, even the security desk where badges were scanned. At 9:30 sharp, the process server arrived. Mid-30s, navy blazer, clipboard in hand, professional, unremarkable, exactly what I'd paid for. He walked straight to the reception desk, spoke briefly to the guard, then waited. 2 minutes later, Greg reappeared from the elevator bank, summoned down by security. The server approached, envelope in hand. Gregory Harlan? Greg froze mid-step. I could see his shoulders tense even from across the street. The server handed him the subpoena, thick, official, impossible to ignore. Greg took it, glanced at the cover page, and his face drained of color. Several employees slowed as they passed, pretending not to stare but staring anyway. Whispers started almost immediately. Phones came out, discreetly at first, then less so. I sipped my coffee. The muffin sat untouched. At 9:45, Sandra Faulkner arrived. Greg's ex-wife was a formidable woman in her early 40s, sharp cheekbones, dark hair pulled into a severe bun, charcoal suit that looked more like armor than clothing. She carried a slim leather briefcase and walked into the lobby with the purposeful stride of someone who had already won before the fight began. I'd met her only once, months ago, when she reached out after learning about Greg and my wife. We'd talked for 3 hours over bad diner coffee. She hadn't asked for sympathy. She'd asked for facts. Today, she was delivering consequences. Sandra went straight to reception, badged in as a visitor, prearranged courtesy from a sympathetic HR contact, and was escorted to the executive floor. I knew the plan because she'd outlined it the night before in a terse text. 9:45. I'll be in his office. You watch from outside. No contact unless necessary. I didn't need contact. I just needed to see. At 10:05, the first visible ripple hit. Greg emerged from the elevators again, face flushed, subpoena clutched like a grenade. He headed toward the parking lot, phone already to his ear. Behind him, 2 security guards flanked Sandra as she exited the building. She looked calm, almost serene. Greg spotted her across the lot and stopped dead. They stood 20 feet apart. No shouting, at least not that I could hear, but the body language screamed. Greg gestured wildly with the subpoena. Sandra simply crossed her arms and waited. After 30 seconds, he turned and stormed to his BMW, slamming the door hard enough that I heard the echo. Sandra watched him peel out, then walked to her own car, a sensible black Audi, and drove away without a backward glance. I stayed another hour. By 11 o'clock, the lobby was buzzing. Small groups clustered near the doors, heads together, phones out. I caught snippets when I stepped outside for air. Divorce subpoena. His ex just showed up. Something about embezzlement. That last one made me smile. Sandra hadn't mentioned embezzlement, but rumors have a way of growing legs. Back in my car, I checked my phone. 3 new texts from my lawyer. Service confirmed. Greg acknowledged receipt. We now have 30 days to compel production. Financials are the tip. Sandra forwarded me the forensic accounting prelim. Irregular transfers from Syntech to offshore accounts matching dates of his business trips with your wife. She's willing to testify if needed. Says it's about justice, not revenge. I typed back, keep pushing. No settlement offers yet. Then a message from Sandra herself. He cracked the moment he saw me, didn't even try to bluff, told security to escort me out before I could say 3 words. Mission accomplished. I replied, thank you. Coffee next week? My treat. Her response came fast. Only if it's good coffee. And bring the next set of questions. I started the engine and pulled away from Syntech. The morning had cost me $450 in process server fees and parking, but the return was priceless. Greg's public humiliation, Sandra's quiet victory, and the first real fracture in the wall of silence he'd built around his affair and his finances. This wasn't about petty revenge. It was about equity. My wife had walked away with half our savings, a condo lease in her name, and a narrative that painted me as the controlling ex. Greg had encouraged that story, fed it to her during late-night calls, promised her a life free of small-minded husbands. Now the ledger was balancing. I drove to the park where Mia and I used to feed ducks on weekends. She was with her mom this week, court-ordered visitation, but I'd see her Saturday. I'd tell her the truth in pieces, age-appropriate pieces, no venom, just facts. Mommy made choices. Daddy is fighting to make sure those choices don't erase our family. My phone buzzed again, unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. The message played on speaker. Mr. Mercer, this is Karen from Syntech HR. Greg Harlan has been placed on administrative leave pending internal review. We received an anonymous tip this morning regarding financial irregularities. If you have any information relevant to our investigation, we'd appreciate a call. I smiled for the first time that day. Anonymous tip. Sandra hadn't wasted time. I pulled over, stared at the empty duck pond, and felt the weight in my chest lighten just a fraction. The first shot had landed. There would be return fire. Greg had lawyers, money, charm, but every shot he fired now would come from a weaker position. I texted my lawyer one last time. HR just called. Greg's on leave. Push the forensic accountants harder. We're not stopping until every dollar is accounted for. Then I drove home. The house was quiet, too quiet, but it was mine. The war wasn't over, but today I'd taken ground, and tomorrow I'd take more. I'd called Sandra the night before and shared some of the evidence I'd gathered about Greg and Melissa's affair, not out of spite, but because she deserved to know how her ex-husband had been spending his time and money. She'd been very interested in the hotel receipts and credit card statements that showed Greg had been using joint assets to fund his affair while their divorce was still being finalized. At 10:15, two men in dark suits entered the building. I didn't know who they were, but they had the look of investigators or auditors. Sandra had mentioned that she was exploring whether Greg had committed fraud by hiding assets during their divorce proceedings. My phone buzzed with a text from Pete. "Where are you? Boss is looking for you." I'd called in sick again, using up vacation days I'd been saving for the trip to Mexico that Melissa and I would never take. "Doctor's appointment," I texted back. "Be in after lunch." At 11:30, the entertainment really began. Through the coffee shop window, I watched as employees started gathering in the Syntech lobby, pointing and whispering. Something big was happening inside. My phone rang. It was Chloe, and she sounded panicked. "Brian, what did you do?" "I'm having coffee and a muffin." "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb. There are investigators all over Syntech. Greg's been suspended, and Melissa's locked in a conference room with HR and some lawyers." "That sounds serious. This is your doing, isn't it? You're trying to destroy them." "I'm not trying to do anything, Chloe. I'm just making sure the truth comes out." "What truth? That they fell in love?" "That happens sometimes, Brian. People can't help who they fall in love with." "You're right," I said. "But they can help whether they steal money to fund their affair. They can help whether they commit fraud and violate company ethics policies. They can help whether they lie to investigators and obstruct justice." "What are you talking about?" "Ask Melissa. I'm sure she'll explain everything." I hung up and ordered another coffee. The show was just getting started. Around noon, I saw Melissa emerge from the building. Even from across the street, I could see that she'd been crying. Her makeup was smeared, her hair disheveled, and she was carrying a cardboard box that probably contained her personal belongings. She'd been fired. Greg appeared a few minutes later, also carrying a box. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie askew. He looked like a man whose world had just collapsed around him. They stood together in the parking lot, talking intensely. Melissa was gesturing wildly, clearly upset. Greg kept looking around nervously, as if he expected more trouble to arrive at any moment. He was right to be nervous. At 12:30, a police car pulled into the Syntech parking lot. Two officers got out and walked into the building. I didn't know what they were investigating, but Sandra had mentioned something about potential criminal charges related to Greg's financial misconduct. My phone rang again. This time it was Melissa. "You bastard," she said without preamble. "You destroyed my career. Are you happy now?" "I didn't destroy anything, Melissa. You did that all by yourself when you decided to steal from our marriage to fund your affair." "I never stole anything." $15,000 in unauthorized charges on our joint credit cards. Money that came out of our shared assets to pay for hotel rooms and gifts for your boyfriend. That's called theft, and it's also called fraud. Those were legitimate expenses. Tell it to the investigators. I'm sure they'll be very interested in your explanation. This isn't over, Brian. I'll fight you on every single thing. The house, the cars, the savings accounts. You'll get nothing. Actually, thanks to your affair and the financial fraud, I'll probably get most of it. My lawyer says adultery cases with proven financial misconduct tend to go very badly for the cheating spouse. She was crying now, the kind of ugly sobs that come from realizing you've made a catastrophic mistake. Why are you doing this to me? I'm not doing anything to you. I'm simply making sure that everyone knows the truth about what you did. You cheated, you lied, you stole, and you tried to destroy my reputation to cover it up. Actions have consequences, Melissa. You're just learning that now. Greg says we can fight this. He has lawyers. Greg's going to have bigger problems than our divorce. His ex-wife is alleging that he hid assets during their divorce proceedings. That's a felony. And now that Syntech has fired him, his legal fees are going to get very expensive very quickly. The silence on the other end of the line told me she was beginning to understand the scope of the disaster she'd created. I loved you, she said finally. For 8 years I loved you. No, you didn't. If you'd loved me, you wouldn't have cheated. If you'd loved me, you wouldn't have brought your boyfriend to our Valentine's dinner. If you'd loved me, you wouldn't have tried to turn our friends against me with lies about abuse. I made mistakes. You made choices. And now, you get to live with the consequences. I hung up and finished my coffee. Across the street, Melissa and Greg were still standing in the parking lot, their boxes of personal belongings at their feet, their careers in ruins. But I wasn't done yet. That evening, I drove to Murphy's bar, where I knew Jim, Dave, and the other guys would be having their usual Tuesday night drinks. I'd been going there with them for 3 years, but tonight would be different. They were sitting at our regular table in the back, nursing beers and looking uncomfortable when they saw me walk in. Word had probably already gotten around about what happened at Syntech. Brian, Jim said as I approached, we heard about Melissa and Greg. That's rough, man. Is it? I pulled out a chair and sat down. I thought you guys believed they were just innocent victims of my emotional abuse. Dave shifted in his seat. Look, we already apologized for that. We were wrong. You were wrong, I agreed. But apologies don't undo damage, do they? Just like Melissa's apologies don't undo her affair. Mike Torres leaned forward. What happened at her office today? The rumors are flying all over town. They got fired. Both of them. Turns out companies don't like it when their employees use company resources to conduct affairs and then lie to investigators about it. Jesus, Steve said. Fired? That's harsh. Is it? They violated company policy, committed fraud, and brought scandal to their employer. What did you think would happen? But their careers are ruined, Dave protested. They'll never work in this industry again. I looked around the table at these men who'd been my friends, who'd believed my wife's lies without question, who'd been ready to confront me about my supposed failures as a husband. You're right, I said. Their careers are ruined, just like my marriage was ruined, just like my reputation was almost ruined by Melissa's lies. The difference is, I didn't deserve what happened to me. They deserve exactly what they got. Don't you think you're being a little vindictive? Jim asked. Vindictive? I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. Let me tell you what vindictive looks like. Vindictive is cheating on your husband for 3 months and then bringing your boyfriend to your anniversary dinner to humiliate him in public. Vindictive is stealing $15,000 from your joint savings to fund your affair. Vindictive is telling everyone who'll listen that your husband was abusive when he never laid a finger on you. The bar had gone quiet. Other patrons were turning to look at our table. Vindictive, I continued, my voice rising, is convincing your husband's friends that he's a piece of shit who drove you into another man's arms, making sure he loses not just his wife, but his entire social circle. Brian, calm down, Dave said. I am calm. This is me calm. You want to see vindictive? Vindictive would be me standing up on this table and telling everyone in this bar exactly what Melissa Dorsey did to her husband. Vindictive would be me posting those hotel room photos on social media for all her family and friends to see. Vindictive would be me making sure that everyone in this town knows exactly what kind of person she really is. I leaned forward, placing my hands on the table. But I'm not vindictive. I'm just someone who believes that actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences are exactly what people deserve. I left them sitting there and walked out of the bar. In the parking lot, I sat in my car for a moment, hands shaking with adrenaline. I'd never spoken to anyone like that before in my life, but it felt good. It felt like justice. My phone buzzed with a text from Pete. Heard you made quite a speech at Murphy's tonight. Good for you. Word traveled fast in a small town. Just setting the record straight, I texted back. Want to grab a drink somewhere else? I'm buying. Rain check. I've got one more stop to make tonight. I drove through the quiet streets of our neighborhood, past the houses where I'd lived for 8 years, past the park where Melissa and I used to walk our dog before he died of cancer 2 years ago, past the life we'd built together before she decided she wanted something different. I pulled into my driveway and sat looking at the house. It was a modest place, nothing fancy, but it was home. Or it had been, when I'd shared it with someone who loved me. Now it was just a building full of memories and broken promises. But it was my building, and tomorrow I was going to start making it into something new, something better, something that belonged entirely to me. The war was almost over, and I was winning. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in my lawyer's office, signing the final divorce papers. Janet Morrison pushed the documents across her mahogany desk with a satisfied smile. Congratulations, Brian. You got everything you asked for, and then some. I'd gotten the house, the car, and 70% of our joint assets. Melissa's affair, combined with the financial fraud she'd committed, had made the settlement a foregone conclusion. Her lawyer had advised her to take the deal, rather than risk going to trial, where her misconduct would become part of the public record. What about Greg? I asked. His situation is more complicated. Sandra's forensic accountant found evidence that he hid nearly $200,000 during their divorce. The district attorney is considering criminal charges. And Melissa? She won't face criminal charges for the credit card fraud, since you were technically married when it happened. But she's been blacklisted from the tech industry. Word is she's working as a waitress at some chain restaurant across town. A waitress. The woman who used to look down on my small job was now taking orders and serving food to make ends meet. There was a certain poetic justice to that. Any word on where she's living? Greg's apartment, last I heard, though that might change if he goes to prison. I left the lawyer's office and drove through downtown Millfield, past the Syntec building where Melissa had worked, past Romano's steakhouse where she'd humiliated me on Valentine's Day. The city looked different now, smaller somehow, like I was seeing it from a great height. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway. It was Pete. How'd it go? It's over. I'm officially divorced and significantly richer. Damn, brother. That calls for a celebration. Murphy's? I considered it. Murphy's was where I'd confronted my former friends 3 weeks ago. Some of them had tried to apologize since then, but the damage was done. I'd learned who my real friends were when the chips were down. Actually, let's try somewhere new. I'm thinking it's time for a fresh start. I know just the place. O'Malley's on 5th Street. They've got great wings and terrible karaoke. Perfect. We met at O'Malley's an hour later. It was a dive bar with sticky floors and neon beer signs, the kind of place where nobody cared about your personal drama or professional failures. Pete was already there, nursing a beer and chatting with the bartender. To freedom, he said, raising his glass when I sat down. To consequences, I corrected, clinking my bottle against his. We were halfway through our wings when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We need to talk, please. M. I showed Pete the message. He snorted. What do you think she wants? Probably money. Or maybe she wants me to call off the dog somehow, make her problems go away. You going to respond? I thought about it for a moment, then typed back, we have nothing to talk about. The response came immediately. I'm pregnant. I stared at the screen, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. Pete saw my expression and leaned over to read the message. Holy shit, is it yours? I did the math quickly. Melissa and I hadn't been intimate in months before I discovered the affair. No, has to be Greg's. So why is she telling you? Another message appeared. I know what you're thinking, but the timing is complicated. Please, just 5 minutes. I'm outside. I looked toward the front window and saw her standing on the sidewalk under a streetlight. She looked terrible, thin, pale, wearing clothes I didn't recognize. The confident, polished woman who'd brought her lover to our Valentine's dinner was gone, replaced by someone who looked desperate and defeated. Don't do it, Pete said. Whatever she wants, it's a trap. But I was already standing up. 5 minutes. Then I'm done with her forever. I walked outside, leaving Pete at the table. Melissa looked even worse up close. Her hair was stringy, her makeup smeared, and she had the hollow-eyed look of someone who hadn't been sleeping. Thank you, she said. I wasn't sure you'd come out. You said you were pregnant. If that's true, congratulations. If it's a lie to get my attention, you've wasted both our time. It's true. 6 weeks. And it's Greg's. She nodded, tears starting to flow. He doesn't want it. He says the timing is terrible with everything that's happening. He wants me to take care of it. That's between you and him. It has nothing to do with me. I don't have anywhere else to turn, Brian. I lost my job. My friends won't talk to me. My family is ashamed of me. I'm living in Greg's apartment, but he's talking about kicking me out. Again, not my problem. I know I don't deserve your help. I know what I did was unforgivable. But I'm desperate. I looked at this woman who'd been my wife for 8 years, who'd shared my bed and my dreams and my bank account, who'd thrown it all away for a man who was now abandoning her when she needed him most. What exactly do you want from me, Melissa? I don't know. Forgiveness, maybe? A chance to start over? Forgiveness? I laughed, and the sound was harsh in the cold night air. You want forgiveness? You cheated on me for 3 months. You stole our money to pay for hotel rooms with your boyfriend. You brought him to our anniversary dinner and made me watch you fall in love with him. You tried to turn our friends against me with lies about abuse. And now you want forgiveness? I was confused. I made terrible mistakes. No, you made choices. And every single choice you made was designed to hurt me as much as possible. You didn't just want to leave me, Melissa. You wanted to destroy me. That's not true. Isn't it? Then why the public humiliation? Why the lies about abuse? Why turn our friends against me? You could have just asked for a divorce, but that wasn't enough for you. You had to make sure I lost everything. She was sobbing now, mascara running down her cheeks in black streams. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm sure you are. Sorry you got caught. Sorry you lost your job. Sorry your boyfriend turned out to be a coward who won't stand by you when things get tough. But you're not sorry for what you did to me. You're just sorry you're facing consequences for it. What am I supposed to do? I don't know, and I don't care. Figure it out. You're a smart woman. At least you used to be. I'm sure you'll think of something. I turned to walk back into the bar, then stopped. Oh, and Melissa? Don't contact me again. Ever. We're done. I left her standing under the streetlight and went back inside. Pete took one look at my face and ordered us both another round. Pregnant? He asked. Pregnant and abandoned. Greg doesn't want the baby. Karma's a bitch. That it is. We drank in silence for a while, watching a middle-aged man massacre Sweet Caroline on the karaoke stage. Finally, Pete spoke up. You feel bad for her? I considered the question. 3 months ago, I would have. 3 months ago, I would have been devastated by the sight of Melissa crying and desperate. I would have wanted to help her, to fix her problems, to be the hero who saved her from her own mistakes. But that man was gone, destroyed in the wreckage of our marriage. No, I said. I don't feel bad for her. I feel nothing for her. And it was true. Looking at Melissa tonight, I'd felt no love, no hate, no anger, no pity. She was just a stranger who'd once been important to me, like a childhood friend you run into at the grocery store and barely recognize. Good, Pete said. That means you're healing. My phone buzzed with one final text. I'll always love you, Brian. I hope someday you can forgive me. I deleted the message without responding and blocked her number. Then I ordered another beer and listened to Pete tell a story about a construction mishap that had resulted in a bathroom being built upside down. For the first time in months, I was genuinely laughing. 2 hours later, I drove home through the quiet streets of my neighborhood. Mrs. Klein's house was dark, but I knew she'd be watching from behind her curtains tomorrow when the moving truck arrived. I was selling the house and moving across town, away from the memories and the gossip and the life I'd built with someone who'd never deserved it. I pulled into my driveway and sat looking at the house one last time. In a few weeks it would belong to someone else, and I'd be starting over in a new place with new neighbors who didn't know my story. The thought should have been scary, but instead it felt liberating. I walked up to the front door, past the flower bed where Melissa had planted roses that never bloomed, past the mailbox where we'd received wedding invitations and Christmas cards addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Dorsey. Inside, the house was full of boxes and empty spaces where furniture used to be. I'd donated most of our shared belongings to charity, keeping only what I needed for my new life. The wedding photos were gone, the couple's artwork removed, the his and hers towels replaced with plain white ones that belonged only to me. I opened a beer and sat in my recliner, the one piece of furniture Melissa had always hated, and turned on the late-night news. The anchor was talking about a corruption scandal at City Hall, about a businessman who'd been arrested for embezzling funds from his own company. Everywhere you looked, people were facing consequences for their actions. My phone rang. It was my sister Jenna calling from Seattle. Hey, little brother, how did the lawyer meeting go? It's official. I'm divorced and rich. Rich? Relatively speaking. Turns out adultery and fraud don't play well in divorce court. Good. What about the cheating bastards? Melissa's pregnant and broke. Greg's probably going to prison. They're living together in a studio apartment, fighting about money and blaming each other for their problems. Sounds like they deserve each other. That's what I keep telling myself. Any regrets? I thought about it. 3 months ago, I'd been a married man with a stable life and a circle of friends. Tonight, I was divorced, alone, and starting over at 38. None, I said, and meant it. Good. You know what this means, right? What? You're free. For the first time in 8 years, you can do whatever you want, be whoever you want, go wherever you want. The world is wide open. She was right. Tomorrow, I could wake up and decide to move to California or learn to play guitar or take that photography class I'd always been interested in. I could date someone new or stay single. I could reinvent myself completely or just be a better version of who I already was. The possibilities were endless. I love you, Jenna. I love you too. Now stop being sentimental and start planning your new life. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet house and thought about the future, about the apartment I'd rented across town with its big windows and hardwood floors and view of the park, about the job offer I'd received from a tech company in the city, doing more interesting work for better pay, about the vacation I was planning to take, 2 weeks in Ireland, traveling alone and answering to nobody, about the life I was going to build for myself, one that belonged entirely to me. Outside, it started to rain. I listened to it drumming against the windows and thought about Melissa, standing under that streetlight, crying for a life she'd thrown away for a man who'd abandoned her at the first sign of trouble. I thought about Greg, facing criminal charges and career ruin, learning too late that actions have consequences. I thought about my former friends, who'd chosen to believe lies rather than trust someone they'd known for years. And I thought about myself, sitting in my empty house, free from all of them. The rain kept falling, washing the streets clean, preparing the world for whatever came next. I finished my beer, turned off the lights, and went to bed. Tomorrow was the first day of the rest of my life,